Story 1. The Darkness of Blackwood High. I'm Alex Turner, 26 years old, a middle school English teacher who had just started working at Blackwood High School in Northwood, Oregon in the summer of 2024. I moved into a small apartment directly across from the school. Blackwood High, though not ancient, had an eerie quality, with its dark red brick walls and tall, narrow windows. I didn't know much about the school's history, but I'd heard vague rumors from a few former colleagues that it had a complicated past, with some less than pleasant tales circulating. I've always been a rather sensitive person, easily affected by negative emotions, and the pressure of the new job often left me feeling stressed and anxious. Being a new teacher at Blackwood High was quite demanding. I often had to stay at school after hours to prepare lessons, grade papers, or attend meetings. In the first few nights, I usually left around 7 to 8 p.m., when the school was deserted, with only a few security guards scattered around. The long hallways, dimly lit by fluorescent lights casting mottled shadows on the floor, created quite a desolate atmosphere. One evening, as I was walking towards my office on the second floor, I heard a very faint sound from the hallway at the end of the wing. A small click, like someone fumbling with a lock. I stopped, listening. Everything fell silent. I thought it was just the wind or my imagination. On subsequent nights, when I stayed later at school, I heard similar sounds again. That click became more frequent, sometimes accompanied by faint footsteps on the stairs, even though I knew I was the only one on that floor. I tried walking around to check, but found no one. Besides the sounds from inside the school, when I was in my apartment at night, I also started hearing small noises from the school building across the street. Faint thudding from the gymnasium. Faint piano music from the music room, even though I was certain the school was closed and there were no activities. A feeling of being watched also began to creep in. When I was alone in my classroom or office, I often felt as if someone was standing right behind me, their cold breath on my neck. It was a heavy, uncomfortable sensation, like invisible eyes staring at me. I frequently turned my head, but saw nothing. Strange dreams also began to plague my sleep. I dreamt I was walking alone in the hallways of Blackwood High at night, and heard the faint sobs of a child from one of the rooms. I often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with those sobs still echoing in my ears. The initial signs had become more frightening, no longer just vague noises. One night, as I was in the staff room on the third floor preparing materials, I caught a glimpse of a small dark shadow flitting very quickly at the end of the hallway, right outside a classroom door. It was a blurry, small figure, like a child, just a fleeting moment in the darkness, then disappearing into one of the classrooms. I startled, my heart pounding. I hurried towards it, but saw nothing. The classroom door was closed and locked. I tried to reassure myself that it was just an optical illusion due to tired eyes. On subsequent nights, when I stayed later at school, I started hearing whispers in the empty classrooms. Faint, indistinct whispers, but with a childlike, sorrowful tone. It seemed to come from inside the classrooms as I walked past them. I often stopped, pressed my ear to the door, trying to listen, but when I focused, the whispers disappeared. In my office, I felt the temperature suddenly drop very low in certain spots, making me shiver. Sometimes, books on the shelves would suddenly fall to the floor, or pencils would automatically roll off the desk. Once, as I was looking in the teacher's restroom mirror, I caught a terrifying reflection behind me. A pale, distorted child's face, with deep black eyes staring at me through the mirror. Those eyes had no expression, just an unnerving emptiness. I whirled around, but there was no one. When I looked back in the mirror, the image was gone, leaving only my own frightened face. I tried to reassure myself that it was just a reflection of light or due to my extreme stress. I began to feel genuinely worried. Stress from work and personal emotions was making me vulnerable. But what was happening was beyond anything I could explain. The tension continued to rise, the strange occurrences becoming more frequent and terrifying. One night, as I was in the staff room around 10 p.m., the entire school had fallen into darkness and silence. Suddenly, I heard someone call my name, very clearly, echoing from the hallway. "Mr. Turner. Mr. Alex," a child's voice, faint but full of sorrow and despair. I jumped, dropping my stack of papers. I stood up abruptly, staring out into the dark hallway. Immediately, a bone-chilling cold enveloped the entire room. The temperature suddenly dropped very low, so much so that I could clearly see my breath pluming out. I felt as if someone was standing right outside my office door, their cold breath seeping through the crack. I tried to calm myself, taking deep breaths, but the calling name kept echoing, continuously, from the hallway. "Mr. Turner, why did you leave?" I yelled. "Who's there? Stay away from me." When I tried to leave the room, the door suddenly jammed. I twisted the doorknob repeatedly, but it wouldn't budge. From the hallway, I heard a child's giggle, cold and eerie. I was terrified, backing away towards my desk. Suddenly, a student desk in the classroom opposite my office crashed to the floor, followed by the sound of shattering glass from a window pane. I looked through the window and saw a small dark figure standing in that classroom, staring at me through the broken glass. I was utterly terrified. I knew I couldn't endure this alone anymore. The prolonged despair and fear led me to decide to investigate the history of Blackwood High School. I believed there was a terrifying secret being hidden. I started asking veteran teachers and staff members at the school. Most of them avoided my questions about old stories. But finally, I found Eleanor Jenkins, an elderly librarian who had worked at the school for over 40 years. She was initially very reluctant, but when I told her about my experiences, she sighed and began to tell a heartbreaking story. Eleanor recounted that, in the 1980s, Blackwood High experienced a tragedy. A young elementary school student named Lily Peterson, 8 years old, was abducted right on school grounds one afternoon after school hours. She was last seen on the playground. The case shocked the entire town, and despite extensive searches, Lily's body was never found. The abductor was also never caught. It was rumored that Lily's spirit still lingered within the school, seeking help and wanting to go home. Eleanor also added that, after the incident, Blackwood High experienced many strange phenomena. Teachers and students frequently reported seeing childlike shadows flitting through hallways, hearing faint sobs or calling names. Some even claimed to have seen Lily Peterson in the same clothes she wore on the day she disappeared. This information sent shivers down my spine. The crying, the small figure, the calling name, it all related to Lily Peterson's tragedy. Could it be that she wanted me to help her find justice? Or help her find her way home? I returned to my office, and with a newfound fear, I searched more thoroughly through the school's old records. In a jammed drawer under an old wardrobe in the storage room, I found an old police report about Lily Peterson's disappearance. Accompanying the report was a faded black and white photo of Lily Peterson. with an innocent smile. On the back of the photo was a child's handwriting. Lily loves her school. I shivered. This photo was definitely Lily's. And perhaps she was still trapped here, forever a student who loved her school. After finding Lily Peterson's file and photo, my fear reached its peak. I knew that her spirit was haunting me, and she wanted my help. The ghostly phenomena became extremely violent. In my office, objects were violently thrown around, lights flickered wildly, then went out completely. Angry screams and direct threats echoed everywhere, accompanied by furious scratching sounds on the walls and the piercing cries of a child. One night, as I was staying late at school to finish some work, I heard a faint child's lullaby from a classroom downstairs. The song was very sad, full of sorrow. I knew it was Lily's voice. I tried to ignore it, but the song grew louder and louder, and it seemed to be leading me somewhere. Finally, I couldn't suppress my curiosity and fear. I turned on my phone's flashlight, slowly walked downstairs, towards Lily Peterson's old classroom. When I reached the door of that classroom, the old wooden door suddenly creaked open slowly, creating an eerie sound. Inside the classroom, everything was pitch black. Only the faint light from my flashlight illuminated it. I saw old desks, blackboards covered in dust. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered continuously, then went out. I was plunged into complete darkness. The air became bone-chilling cold. I heard faint sobs right next to my ear. Then, a small, blurry figure appeared in the middle of the room. It was Lily Peterson. She wore an old plaid dress, with long black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her eyes were deep-set, full of tears and sadness. She said nothing, just extended her hand towards me. Her small, pale fingers. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I backed away. Lily slowly moved towards me, each step making no sound. In that moment, I saw a terrifying scene replayed before my eyes. The image of a strange, tall man, pulling Lily Peterson out of the classroom, his hand clamped over her mouth. Lily struggled, screaming in vain. Then, the image faded, disappearing. I understood. Lily didn't want to harm me. She wanted me to know the truth about her death. I yelled, "Lily, who did this to you? Tell me." She looked at me with despair, then pointed towards a corner of the classroom. I shone my flashlight towards it, and saw an old school bag hidden under a desk. I picked it up. Inside, I found a handwritten letter from Lily to her parents, describing her fear of a strange man who often roamed around the school. Along with it was a small piece of blood-stained fabric. Suddenly, a bone-chilling cold enveloped me. I heard Lily's faint sigh of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. Her figure slowly dissolved into the air, leaving behind a strange sense of peace. The next morning, I reported what I had found to the police. The blood-stained fabric was sent for testing. The police reopened Lily Peterson's case, and thanks to the new clues, they found evidence linking it to a former school security guard, who had resigned shortly after Lily's disappearance. He was arrested and eventually confessed. Lily Peterson finally received justice. After the incident, I moved out of the apartment across from the school and no longer worked at Blackwood High. I knew that Lily's spirit had found peace, but the haunting memories of what I had experienced still clung to me. I still frequently have nightmares about the dark hallways of the school, about Lily's sobs, and about the terrifying face in the mirror. Every time I pass by a deserted school at night, or hear a child crying, I feel a chill down my spine. The feeling as if lingering spirits are still out there somewhere, seeking peace, or waiting for someone who can help them find justice. I was lucky to escape, but that fear will forever be a part of me. Blackwood High, though it has been cleansed, still holds its own terrifying secrets. A place where the darkness never truly ends. Story 2. Guard Lucas's Midnight Watch. I'm Sarah Jenkins, 27 years old, a freelance photojournalist working for a local newspaper in Willow Creek, Nevada. I had just moved into an apartment in the town's old district in the winter of 2023. Near my apartment was Willow Creek High School, an old, Gothic-style school built in the early 20th century, with a rather somber architecture. I heard rumors that the school had a long history and many strange stories. But I never truly believed in ghosts. However, a friend of mine, Daniel Miller, is a paranormal enthusiast and often invited me to explore supposed haunted locations. He introduced me to guard Lucas Thorne, 58 years old, a security guard at Willow Creek High, who had worked there for over 30 years. Lucas was a quiet, reserved man, who always seemed to carry a hint of sadness. Recently, Daniel told me that Lucas had started telling strange stories about what he saw at the school at night, especially after 11 p.m. Guard Lucas Thorne was a solitary man, who had spent almost his entire life intertwined with Willow Creek High. I knew he had experienced a great personal tragedy a few years prior, losing his only daughter in an accident. This made Lucas withdrawn, and sometimes I'd see him sitting quietly in the guard room, his gaze distant. At first, the stories he told were vague. There are strange noises, Sarah, like someone walking in the third-floor hallway, he whispered to me over the phone one night, his voice trembling, and I know for sure, the school's locked up tight. In the following nights, I began to notice a distinct change in Lucas. His face was always tired, gaunt, his eyes deeply shadowed. He frequently spoke of creaking sounds, doors opening and closing by themselves, or faint giggles from empty classrooms. I heard a basketball bouncing in the gym. Sarah, Lucas told me seriously, even though it was 2 a.m. and there were no activities at the school. Then the sound of water running in the student restroom, like someone had left the tap on. Lucas also said that, sometimes, when he patrolled the dark hallways, he felt watched. It's like someone standing right behind me, their cold breath on my neck, he said, then turned his head to look around, his eyes filled with fear. I often saw him shining his flashlight into every corner of the hallway, but found nothing. Lucas also began to have strange, recurring dreams. He dreamt he was patrolling the school late at night, and saw a small student figure standing at the end of a hallway. With their back to him, the figure never turned around, just stood silently, exuding an indescribable coldness. He often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, with the chilling sensation still lingering. The initial signs had become more frightening, no longer just vague noises. One night, around 10:30 p.m., Lucas was sitting in the guard room, reviewing security camera footage. He recounted to me that, suddenly, on the camera screen showing the second-floor hallway, he briefly saw a small dark shadow flit past very quickly. It wasn't a clear person, just a fleeting shadow, but he was certain it was a child's figure. Lucas, startled, adjusted the camera, but the shadow had vanished. He then went to patrol the second floor to check. As he walked down the hallway, the faint fluorescent lights casting shadows on the floor, he began to hear whispers. Faint, Indistinct whispers, but with a childlike, sorrowful tone, seemingly emanating from the closed classrooms. Mr. Lucas Thorne, he recounted. The voice was very faint, yet chillingly clear, like someone was standing right next to him. He stopped, holding his breath. Everything fell silent. He tried to reassure himself that it was just his imagination. In the guard room, small objects began to shift inexplicably. Lucas's coffee cup suddenly overturned. The file on the desk was displaced. He frequently felt the temperature in the room suddenly drop very low in certain spots, making him shiver. Most terrifying was one instance. When Lucas was looking at the security camera monitor showing the main hallway, he briefly saw a terrifying reflection in the glass pane of a classroom in the distance. A pale child's face, with deep black eyes staring at the camera. That face had no expression, just an unnerving emptiness. He startled, rubbed his eyes. When he looked back at the screen, the image was gone, leaving only the empty hallway. He began to doubt himself, wondering if he was too tired or hallucinating. Lucas's tension grew increasingly, the strange occurrences becoming more frequent and terrifying. He barely slept and was constantly in a state of fear. One night, around 11 p.m., Lucas was doing his final patrol. He passed through the middle school classroom area, which was usually the quietest part of the school at night. As he reached the end of the third-floor hallway, where the light had been broken for a long time and was always shrouded in darkness, he suddenly heard faint sobs. The sobs were very sad, yet they drew him deeper into the darkness. Lucas turned on his flashlight, shining it towards the sound of crying. And then, he saw it. A small, ethereal figure of a schoolgirl stood at the end of the hallway. With her back to him, she wore an old plaid school dress, her long black hair falling over her shoulders. The air around her suddenly became bone-chilling cold. "Lily," Lucas whispered, unable to control himself. He had heard the story of Lily Peterson, a student who had mysteriously disappeared from the school in the 1980s. The girl's figure stirred slightly. Lucas tried to move closer, but his legs seemed frozen. The girl slowly turned her head. "Mr. Lucas, why are you here?" Her voice was thin, faint, yet it echoed throughout the dark hallway. Her eyes were deep-set, black, pupil-less, staring at Lucas. Her face was pale, ashen, devoid of any life. Lucas was utterly terrified. He couldn't utter a word. His heart pounded in his chest. The girl slowly extended her hand towards him. Her small, skeletal, pale fingers. Lucas felt a bone-chilling cold run down his spine, as if someone had just poured ice water over him. "I'm so cold, Mr. Lucas. I can't find my way home," the girl whispered, her voice full of despair. Suddenly, the flashlight in Lucas's hand flickered continuously, then went out completely. He was plunged into darkness. Lily's sobs echoed throughout the hallway, accompanied by eerie giggling. Lucas screamed, turned and ran. He bolted down the stairs, not daring to look back. He rushed out of the school, ignoring everything, ran back to the guard room, locked the door tightly, trembling all over. After that terrifying night, Lucas was almost in a state of collapse. He no longer dared to patrol alone, and often asked for shift changes or for someone to accompany him. I, as a reporter, noticed that Lucas's story had something special about it. I decided to investigate it myself. I began searching for information about Lily Peterson's disappearance. I went to the town library. Rummaging through old newspapers, I found several articles from the 1980s. detailing the case of Lily Peterson, a third-grade student, who went missing from Willow Creek High on October 15, 1985. She was last seen on her way to the school library after school hours. The case was never solved, and Lily's body was never found. It was rumored that she was abducted by a pervert and murdered somewhere. I also found an old school yearbook from 1985. In it was a photo of Lily Peterson, with an innocent smile and large, round eyes. Below it was a short caption: Lily Peterson loves reading and always wants to explore new things. I shivered as I read it. Lily was last seen going to the library. I returned to the school to meet Agnes Donovan, the former principal of Willow Creek High, who had retired and lived in a nearby nursing home. She had worked at the school at the time of Lily's disappearance. She was very emotional when I mentioned Lily. She recounted that Lily was a very intelligent, eager to learn girl, and often stayed late at school to read in the library. She also added that, at that time, a new security guard was hired, named Robert Simmons, who had a standoffish demeanor and often avoided people. He also mysteriously disappeared shortly after Lily's disappearance, leaving no trace. Agnes also shared a terrifying detail. On the night Lily disappeared, the school's security camera system mysteriously malfunctioned, failing to record any images, and the fire alarm in the library automatically went off at 11 p.m. that night. But there was no fire. I shivered. The fire alarm at 11 p.m. It matched the time Lucas saw Lily's spirit. I returned to Willow Creek High School one night. I went with Lucas, who was still trembling. I wanted to find out if there was something Lucas had inadvertently discovered that fateful night, causing Lily's spirit to connect with him. We went to the school library, where Lily was last seen. The old, vast library, with towering bookshelves, was shrouded in darkness. I turned on my flashlight, shining it everywhere. Suddenly, Lucas gasped softly, This can't be." He pointed to a hidden corner, behind an old bookshelf. I shone my flashlight towards it. There was a dark brown stain on the wooden floor, faded with age, but still discernible. Along with it were a few deep scratches on the floor. Lucas trembled as he knelt, touching the stain. "I've seen this stain in my dreams. This is where the child was." Suddenly, the air in the library became bone-chilling cold. Books on the shelves began to fall to the floor continuously, creating a violent noise, the sound of tearing paper. Angry growls echoed throughout the library. "You mustn't." A thin voice, full of hatred, echoed from the bookshelves. It wasn't Lily's voice. It was a male voice. Hoarse, full of malice. A huge, tall, blurry dark shadow appeared amidst the bookshelves. It had no clear form, just a black mass, but I felt its presence filled with resentment. The dark shadow lunged towards us. Lucas screamed, "No, stay away from it, Sarah." Lucas and I backed away, trying to run, but the library door suddenly slammed shut, locking tightly. The eerie giggling of a child echoed throughout the library, mixed with the angry growls of the dark shadow. I turned to look at Lucas. His eyes were bloodshot, filled with despair. "That's him. That's the one who killed Lily. He's been haunting this place, and now, he wants us." Suddenly, the huge dark shadow lunged at Lucas. I saw a surge of dark energy envelop him. Lucas screamed in pain, collapsing. I was utterly terrified, but I knew I had to do something. I saw an old book fall out of Lucas's pocket. It was a personal diary. I quickly picked it up. Inside, I saw Lucas's scrawled handwriting, recounting his dreams about a trapped girl and about a bad man who always followed her. There was a small photo clipped inside the diary. It was a picture of Lily Peterson. I realized Lily's spirit had connected with Lucas because he, with his grief over losing his own child, empathized with her loneliness and despair. And now, the killer's spirit had appeared, not wanting the truth to be exposed. After that night, I reported everything I found to the police. The blood-stained fabric was sent for testing. The police reopened Lily Peterson's case more thoroughly. And thanks to the new clues that Lucas and I found, especially the stain and scratches in the library, along with Eleanor and Agnes's testimonies about Robert Simmons, they found an old diary of his in the school's storage room, which contained shocking confessions. He was put on a wanted list and eventually arrested in another state. After years of evading capture, Lily Peterson finally found justice. Lucas recovered from the shock. He no longer worked as a guard at Willow Creek High. He moved to live with a relative in another state, trying to find peace. He told me that he still saw Lily in his dreams, but it was no longer a nightmare, but a peaceful dream, as if Lily was smiling and waving goodbye. As for me, I no longer doubted the spiritual world. Willow Creek High School, after being cleansed and undergoing a renovation process, no longer had strange phenomena. But I knew that past tragedies never truly disappear. There are places where pain and injustice still linger, waiting for someone brave enough to unveil the secret and find justice. And I, Sarah Jenkins, will always be willing to tell those stories. Story 3. The White Figure in the Dead of Night. I'm Martha Coolidge, 34 years old, recently divorced and trying to start a new life. I accepted a job managing an old apartment complex, named Oak Haven Apartments, on the outskirts of Silent Hollow, Pennsylvania in the summer of 2023. This apartment complex was quite old, built in the 1950s, and had a somewhat cold appearance, though it looked normal during the day. There were about 10 apartments, but only 3 families lived there, creating an unusually deserted atmosphere. I myself am a rather sensitive person, and the sad events of the past sometimes make me feel lonely and overly anxious. As soon as I moved in, I vaguely heard from the locals that Oak Haven Apartments had a less than pleasant history, but they didn't specify what it was. I just tried to dismiss those thoughts and focus on my new job. Managing a deserted apartment complex wasn't too busy, but it gave me a strange sense of isolation. During the day, everything was quite quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the wind blowing through the old window frames. But when night fell, everything seemed to change. In the first few nights, when I was alone in the manager's apartment on the ground floor, I began to hear small noises from upstairs, soft footsteps, like someone walking slowly on the old wooden floor. I thought to myself it must be one of the few remaining residents walking around late. But then I realized, those footsteps often appeared in the late hours, when I knew for sure that the others had gone to bed. The footsteps were sometimes steady, sometimes they would stop abruptly, then start again, as if someone was pacing restlessly. Besides the footsteps, I also heard other strange sounds. The creaking of doors as if someone was opening or closing them gently, even though I had checked carefully and all the apartments were locked. Sometimes, I even heard a small clattering sound, like objects falling or being moved. I started to have the feeling of being watched. When I was alone in the apartment, especially at night, I often felt like someone was watching me from behind. It was a chilling sensation, causing me to turn around sharply to check. But I never saw anyone. Strange dreams also began to haunt my sleep. I often dreamt of wandering through the dark hallways of the apartment complex and seeing a white figure flit past at the end of the hallway. The figure had no clear face, but it exuded a strange sadness and loneliness. I often woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, with that image still haunting my mind. The initial signs gradually became clearer and more frightening, no longer just vague feelings. One evening, as I was checking the lighting system in the second-floor hallway, I briefly saw a white shadow flit very quickly in the corner of my eye. Right in front of the door of a locked, vacant apartment. It was just a blurry, pale white image, but I was sure I saw it. I startled. My heart skipped a beat, and quickly turned my head, but saw nothing. On subsequent nights, when I stayed up late working in my small office, I began to hear whispers. Very faint whispers. Indistinct words, but with a mournful, cold tone, as if trying to convey something painful. It seemed to come from the old walls, or from the cracks in the dilapidated window frames. In my apartment, I often felt the temperature suddenly drop very low in certain areas, especially in the corner of the living room and near the windows. Although the heating was on, those places remained chillingly cold. Once, as I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I briefly saw a strange reflection behind me. A pale woman's face, with long black hair falling down, deep black eyes staring at me through the mirror. That face had a heartbreakingly sad, desperate look. I whirled around, but there was no one. When I looked back in the mirror, the image had vanished, leaving only my own worried face. I wondered if I was just too stressed. I began to feel truly uneasy. The loneliness after the divorce and the pressure of a new life were probably affecting me. But what was happening didn't seem to have a rational explanation. The tension and fear grew increasingly, leading me to install a few simple security cameras around the apartment complex, especially in the areas where I often heard strange noises. After a few days, when reviewing the footage recorded the night before, I was horrified to see a strange image. Around 2:17 a.m., a pale white figure appeared at the end of the second-floor hallway. It was the shape of a woman, wearing a long white dress, her long black hair obscuring her face. The figure glided very slowly, as if floating rather than walking, then disappeared at the end of the hallway. I watched that clip over and over, but still couldn't believe my eyes. No one lived at the end of the second-floor hallway. All the apartments were locked. And how could someone move so strangely? I decided to stay up late to watch directly. Around 2 a.m., I sat in front of the computer screen, tensely watching the camera images. Everything was still quiet, nothing unusual. But then, right at 2:17 a.m., I saw it again. The white figure reappeared at the end of the second-floor hallway, exactly like the previous night's footage. This time, I saw it more clearly. The long white dress trailed on the floor. The black hair completely covered the face. The figure stood silently for a moment, then slowly turned its head towards the camera. Although I couldn't see the face clearly, I felt a cold, sad gaze staring directly at me. An overwhelming fear enveloped me. I quickly turned off the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I had seen something that didn't belong to this world. After seeing the white figure on the security camera, I couldn't keep it a secret anymore. I decided to learn about the history of Oakhaven Apartments. I started asking the longtime residents in the neighborhood. Most people avoided the topic when I mentioned the apartment complex. But finally, I found Eleanor Davies, an elderly woman who had lived across from Oakhaven Apartments for over 50 years. She was initially very hesitant, but when I told her about what I had experienced, she sighed and began to tell a sad story. Eleanor recounted that, in the 1960s, Oakhaven Apartments used to be a fairly lively place. But then, a terrible tragedy occurred. A young woman named Isabel Moreau, about 20 years old, who lived in the apartment at the end of the second-floor hallway, had committed suicide by hanging herself in her room. Isabel was a beautiful girl, but very lonely and had a history of depression. The incident shocked the entire town, and since then, Oakhaven Apartments began to be known as haunted. Many tenants moved out after experiencing strange phenomena. Eleanor also said that many people had seen a white figure lingering in the window of the apartment where Isabel used to live, especially at night. Eleanor also shared a chilling detail. On the night Isabel committed suicide, someone heard heart-wrenching cries and someone calling out a name from her apartment around 2:15 a.m. I shivered. That time almost exactly matched the time I saw the white figure on the camera. Could it be the spirit of Isabel Moreau? Why was she still here? And why was I seeing her? After learning the story of Isabel Moreau, I felt a strong urge to find out more about her. I wanted to know why her spirit was still trapped at Oakhaven Apartments. I tried to find information about Isabel online and in the town's old records, but there wasn't much. It seemed her story had been forgotten over time. One night, around 2:15 a.m., I was awakened again by a strange sound. It was the faint sound of sobbing, coming from upstairs. I shuddered, realizing it was around the time Eleanor had described Isabel's cries. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go up to the second floor, to the apartment where Isabel used to live. I took a flashlight and a small crucifix, and nervously climbed the stairs. The second-floor hallway was pitch black and cold. The apartment at the end of the hallway, where Isabel had lived, had its door closed and locked. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to listen, but only heard the faint whistle of the wind through the broken window panes. Suddenly, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. Why doesn't anyone hear me? A thin, sorrowful woman's voice. I startled and whirled around, but there was no one. I tried to open the apartment door, but it was locked from the inside. I called out loudly, "Ms. Isabel, are you there? Can I help you with something?" There was no response, only the whistling of the wind and the sound of my own heart pounding in my chest. I felt a cold presence enveloping me. Then, I heard a light scratching sound on the door from inside the apartment, as if someone was trying to get out. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, then suddenly stopped. I was utterly terrified, backing away towards the stairs. I knew I shouldn't stay there anymore. After that night, I didn't dare to stay at Oakhaven Apartments alone anymore. I told a few friends about what I had experienced, but most of them thought I was hallucinating due to stress. However, I knew what I had seen and heard was real. The spirit of Isabel Moreau was still trapped there, forever carrying her sadness and loneliness. I tried to learn more about Isabel's life. She was a young woman full of dreams, but she had suffered from loneliness and serious psychological issues. Perhaps her sudden and tragic death had prevented her spirit from moving on, still lingering here, seeking someone who could listen and understand her pain. I tried to contact Isabel's surviving relatives, but without success. It seemed no one remembered her anymore. Eventually, I decided to move out of Oakhaven Apartments. I couldn't continue living in a place where sadness and haunting prevailed so strongly. But even after moving to a new place, I often felt a cold gaze watching me, especially at night. Sometimes, I still caught a glimpse of a white shadow in the corner of my eye. I knew that, even though I had left Oakhaven Apartments, a part of that haunting would forever follow me. The spirit of Isabelle Moreau was still out there somewhere. Perhaps still seeking peace. Or perhaps, she simply didn't want me to forget her. And every time I thought about Oakhaven Apartments, I felt a pang of sadness. A deep empathy for the lonely white figure in that dark hallway. Story 4. Cold Moonlight on the Old Window. I'm Olivia Hayes, 31 years old, working the night shift at a hospital in the small town of Amity Creek, Maine. My shift usually ends around 11 p.m., and the drive home always takes me past Amity Creek High School. The school I attended a little over a decade ago. The school was quite old, built in the early 20th century. With gray brick buildings and tall, towering windows that had an antique look. Even though I graduated a long time ago, every time I drive past the school late at night, I still often glance inside, stirring up old memories. Lately, I've been facing quite a bit of pressure at work, and the late night drives home alone in the dark sometimes make me feel a bit uneasy. I've never believed in ghosts, but there's something about this old school that always gives me an indescribable creepy feeling. The road from the hospital to my house is quite deserted late at night. The dim yellow street lights cast long shadows and pools of deep darkness on the damp asphalt. Every time I passed Amity Creek High, I would usually slow down, looking through the iron fence into the silent school grounds. At night, the school looked even more desolate and somewhat ominous. The pale moonlight shone down on the vast schoolyard, highlighting the gaunt, tall trees and the empty playground. Occasionally, only a few hallway lights would be dimly lit, casting faint streaks of light through the windows. I remembered every corner of the schoolyard, every hallway. This place was connected to me throughout my teenage years. Sometimes, I wondered if my memories still lingered somewhere within these old walls. The initial late-night drives home were quite uneventful. I only heard the sound of my car engine and the gentle wind rustling through the trees. Nothing unusual. Just an old school falling asleep for the night. However, gradually, I began to feel that something was different. When I stopped at the red light right in front of the school gate, I often had the feeling that someone was watching me from inside. It was an uncomfortable feeling, causing me to quickly glance at the dark windows. But I never saw anything. Sometimes, when I drove slowly past the school, I would faintly hear very subtle sounds from within, a slight creaking, like an old door being moved by the wind, or a small thud, as if something had fallen on the floor. I told myself it was probably just the wind or my imagination. But the feeling of unease still lingered in my heart every time I passed this school at night. The initial signs, though small, planted an indescribable unease in my heart. I began to pay closer attention to the small details every time I passed the school at night. I noticed that, in a few windows on the west wing, second floor, there always seemed to be a faint yellow light. Even when it was very late and the entire school was shrouded in darkness. I wondered if someone had forgotten to turn off the light, or if some staff member was working late. But then I noticed, that light always only appeared in those exact windows, and I never saw any movement of people inside. This made me feel a bit strange. One night, while stopped at the red light, I rolled down my car window. The late-night air was so still that I could clearly hear the chirping of crickets. But amidst that silence, I faintly heard a very soft sound, like someone humming a lullaby. A woman's voice, very sad and mournful. That sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the school. I listened more carefully, but then the humming stopped. A few nights later, as I drove slowly past the school, I felt an unusual gust of cold air rush into the car through the closed window cracks. That icy chill only lasted a few seconds, but it made me shiver. It wasn't that cold outside at all. I began to have the feeling that someone was watching me from inside the school. Every time I looked at the dark windows, I felt an invisible pressure weighing down on me, as if an unseen gaze was staring directly at me. I tried to ignore these strange feelings, telling myself that I was probably just too sensitive and anxious due to work stress. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right at my old school at night. One Tuesday night, after a stressful shift at the hospital, I drove home as usual. When passing Amity Creek High, out of habit, I glanced at the school, and then, I saw it, in one of the second-floor windows of the West Wing, where I often saw the faint yellow light. There was a figure standing. It was the silhouette of a girl, wearing a long, pure white dress, her long black hair falling down to her waist. The girl stood silently, facing out the window, as if looking towards the road. My heart seemed to stop for a moment. I rubbed my eyes, looking again. The girl's figure was still there, not moving at all. The pale moonlight shone on her long black hair, creating an image that was both eerie and sad. I quickly pulled over to the side of the road, turning off the engine. The surrounding space became eerily silent. Only the sound of a gentle breeze rustling through the dry branches of the trees could be heard. I stared intently at that window, trying to see more clearly. But the darkness inside the hallway and the moonlight reflecting off the glass made everything blurry. I could only clearly see the long white dress and the girl's thick black hair. I felt a cold fear spread throughout my body. Who could be standing there at this hour? The school had been closed for a long time. And why a girl in a white dress with such long hair? I tried to call the local police, but then put my phone down. I had no evidence. Someone standing at a window at night probably wasn't something too unusual. Maybe a cleaner or someone who forgot something. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The image of the girl in the white dress with long black hair in the silent late night had planted an indescribable unease in my heart. In the following nights, every time I passed the school, I couldn't help but glance towards that window. Sometimes, I still saw the faint yellow light, but I no longer saw the figure of the girl in white. However, the fear and curiosity in my heart grew stronger. I decided to learn about the history of Amity Creek High. I went to the town library and searched through old newspapers and school yearbooks. In a yearbook from the 1950s, I happened to read a short news item about a female student named Eleanor Vance, who had tragically died in an accident right on school grounds. Eleanor was a talented literature student, loved reading, and had beautiful, long black hair. The accident happened late one evening, after she stayed at school to prepare for a play rehearsal. She was wearing a white dress that she was going to wear in the performance. The news item didn't specify the details of the accident, but it left a deep impression on me. A young girl, long black hair, a white dress, who died tragically at this school. I also asked a few older residents in town about stories related to the school. Some vaguely remembered the accident of Eleanor Vance, and there were also unclear rumors about her spirit still lingering somewhere in the school. An elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who had lived near the school since she was a child, told me a story she had heard from her mother. That on moonlit nights, sometimes people saw a white figure gliding through the school hallways, and heard faint singing echoing from the empty classrooms. These stories sent shivers down my spine. The image of the girl in the white dress with long black hair that I had seen seemed to match what people rumored about Eleanor Vance. After learning the story of Eleanor Vance, my late-night drives home became heavier. I no longer dared to look directly at the school, but the image of the girl in white still haunted my mind. One night, as I was driving past the school, I suddenly heard a very clear sound. It was the faint sound of a lullaby, a woman's voice. Achingly sad. That singing seemed to be coming from inside the school, from the West Wing, where I had seen the girl in white. I shivered. That song sounded very familiar, like I had heard it somewhere before. I stopped the car, turned off the engine, and listened. The singing continued. Soft, mournful, like a lament from the distant realms. I tried to remember where I had heard this song. Then suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. It was the song that the school choir had sung during the play rehearsal that Eleanor Vance never had the chance to participate in. I had heard the upperclassmen practicing this song when I was a freshman. A cold fear spread throughout my body. That singing, was it Eleanor Vance's? Was she still in this school, forever singing her unfinished song? I didn't dare to look at the school anymore. I quickly started the car and drove away as fast as I could, leaving behind the sad singing echoing in the silent night. In the following nights, that singing still frequently appeared every time I passed the school late at night. Sometimes, I also heard faint footsteps in the hallway, and felt an unusual gust of cold air rush into my car. I knew that Eleanor Vance was still there, and perhaps, she wanted me to know something. Eleanor Vance's haunting became clearer, no longer just fleeting sounds and images. One night, while stopped at the red light in front of the school gate, I clearly saw the faint yellow light shining from the familiar second-floor window. This time, I decided to look more closely. I focused my eyes on that window. After a moment, the figure of the girl in white reappeared. She stood silently, looking out. But this time, her long black hair moved slightly, as if a gentle breeze was blowing through it. And then, she slowly turned her head. For the first time, I clearly saw Eleanor Vance's face. Her face was pale, her eyes large, round, and black, but filled with deep sorrow. There was no ferocity or scariness, only a lingering sadness and utter loneliness. Her gaze met mine, through the window pane, through the darkness, as if pleading for something. I felt a strange connection with this girl, a deep empathy for her pain. I wanted to get out of the car, wanted to go into the school, wanted to talk to her. But an invisible fear held me back. I didn't know what to say, what to do. We looked at each other in silence for a long moment, with only the cold moonlight shining down on the deserted school grounds. Then slowly, Eleanor Vance gave a faint smile. A sad smile. Before her figure vanished into the darkness. The yellow light in the window also flickered off. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of Eleanor Vance's sad eyes haunted my mind. I knew that she didn't want to harm me. She just wanted someone to remember her, someone to know her story. I still continued to drive past Amity Creek High every night after work. Sometimes, I still see the faint yellow light flickering in that window. And on moonlit nights, I still have the feeling that someone is standing behind the door, watching me with sad eyes. I don't know if Eleanor Vance has found peace yet, But I know that her story will forever be etched in my mind. A reminder of the tragedies that can lie hidden beneath the serene facade of a small town. Story 5. The Slam in the Empty Night. I'm Frank Miller, 52 years old, a night shift security guard at Northwood High School in the small town of Northwood, Ohio. It's a fairly old school, built in the 1930s, with long, desolate hallways and heavy wooden doors. I've worked here for almost 10 years now, and usually the night shift is pretty quiet. My wife passed away not long ago, and sometimes being alone in this large school late at night makes me feel lonely and sad. I'm not usually one to believe in ghosts, but lately, I've started to feel that strange things are happening in the school at night. Maybe it's just because I'm too stressed and thinking too much after my wife's loss, but what I hear and feel sometimes gives me the chills. My night shift usually starts at 10 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. the next morning. Typically, after checking all the doors and making sure everything is secure, I'll sit in the security office on the ground floor, watching the surveillance cameras or reading a book to pass the time. Northwood High School is very quiet at night. Only the wind whistling outside the windows and the steady tick-tock of the old clock on the wall break the silence. The hallways are shrouded in darkness, with only the faint night lights casting pale streaks of light. I've gotten so used to this quiet, that sometimes even a small noise makes me jump. Usually, it's just a tree branch brushing against the window or the pipes rattling. However, for the past week or so, I've started hearing other strange sounds. Small noises, difficult to pinpoint. A soft tapping sound like someone walking very lightly on the upper floor, even though I know for sure that I'm the only one in the school besides me. Sometimes, when I patrol the hallways, I have the feeling that someone is following me from behind. A chill runs down my spine, causing me to turn around sharply to check. But I never see anyone. In the security office, I've also heard the door of a teacher's room across the hallway automatically creak open and then close a few times, even though there's no breeze and the door isn't loose. I try to explain these phenomena logically. Maybe it's due to temperature changes causing the wood to expand or contract. But deep down, I feel like something isn't right. In the following nights, the strange noises became more frequent and clearer. The soft tapping on the upper floor was no longer gentle, but became distinct footsteps, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, as if someone was pacing restlessly. I frequently checked the surveillance cameras, but never saw any signs of intruders. All the doors remained securely locked. One night, as I was sitting in the security office, I heard clear footsteps walking up the nearby staircase. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, unlike the light sounds I usually heard. My heart started to beat faster. I stood up, carefully looking out into the hallway. Darkness enveloped everything, with only the faint night light at the end of the hallway casting a dim glow. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps continued to climb, then stopped on the second floor. I called Central Security on the walkie-talkie, but no one answered. The signal was probably weak in this area. I decided to check it myself. I walked down the hallway, shining my flashlight into each classroom. All were empty, with no sign of anyone. But the feeling that someone was nearby didn't disappear. When I turned back towards the stairs to go downstairs, I heard footsteps again, this time right above my head, on the third floor. Hurried footsteps, like someone was running. I froze, a cold sweat breaking out. I knew for sure that I was the only person in the school at this time. Around 2 a.m., I felt the need to use the restroom. The staff restroom was at the end of the ground floor hallway, near the security office. I left the office, walking down the silent hallway. When I was in the men's restroom, I suddenly heard a very loud noise coming from across the hallway, from the women's restroom. It was a powerful slam, like a door being blown shut by a strong wind or someone deliberately slamming it. I jumped, my heart pounding. I quickly pulled up my pants, rushing out of the men's restroom. The hallway was still dark and quiet. I stood at the door of the women's restroom, listening. There were no other sounds, but the sound of the slam still echoed in my ears. I was sure I hadn't misheard. "Is anyone in there?" I called out loudly, my voice slightly trembling. "This is security, Frank. The school is closed." There was no answer, only the eerie silence that enveloped everything. I slowly pushed the door of the women's restroom open slightly. The door wasn't locked, just ajar. Inside it was pitch black, with only a faint light from the hallway seeping in. I shone my flashlight inside. The sinks, the stalls were all in place. There was no sign of anyone, but the door of one of the toilet stalls was slightly open, the latch not engaged. I felt an unusual gust of cold air coming from inside the women's restroom, even though the temperature outside wasn't low. A chill ran down my spine. "Is anyone in there?" I called again, my voice now clearly trembling. Still no answer, only the faint whistle of the wind outside the window. I felt a strange presence lurking somewhere in this room. After the incident in the women's restroom, I couldn't go back to sleep. I sat in the security office, trying to calm myself down. But the fear clung to me. I remembered the strange stories I had heard about this school from previous security guards. They said that Northwood High was built on the grounds of an old orphanage, where a terrible fire had occurred in the 1950s. Many children had died in that fire. I rummaged through the old filing cabinet in the security office, hoping to find some information about the school's history. Finally, I found an old, tattered diary. It belonged to a security guard named Robert Jenkins, who had worked at the school in the 1970s. In the yellowed pages of the diary, Robert Jenkins had recorded many strange events he had witnessed during his night shifts. Faint sobs in the empty hallways, shadowy figures flitting past in the corner of his eye, and a constant feeling of being watched. There was one entry that particularly caught my attention. Robert Jenkins wrote about frequently hearing a loud slamming sound in the women's restroom at night, even though no one was there. He also recounted that once, while checking the women's restroom after hearing the noise, he had seen a blurry image of a small girl standing at the end of the room, then disappearing immediately afterward. Robert Jenkins ended that diary entry with a trembling sentence. "I believe the children who died in the fire years ago are still here, forever trapped in this school." Reading this, I felt a terrifying coincidence between what Robert Jenkins had experienced and what I was going through. The slamming sound in the women's restroom. Could it be related to those young souls? After reading Robert Jenkins's diary, the fear inside me was no longer vague, but had become a real obsession. I began to believe that Northwood High was truly haunted. In the following night shifts, I always felt tense and uneasy. Every small sound in the school made me jump. I tried to avoid the area around the women's restroom, but curiosity and fear urged me to investigate. One night, as I was sitting in the security office, watching the surveillance cameras, suddenly all the monitors flickered and went black. The power in the room also flickered and then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, with only the faint light from the flashlight in my hand. An eerie silence enveloped the entire school. I felt a chill down my spine, as if someone was very close to me. Then I heard it, a whispered call. Very faint, but clear in the stillness. "Mr. Security." A child's voice, weak and sad. It seemed to come from the hallway right outside the security office. I stood up, gripping the flashlight tightly, trembling as I called out, "Who's there? Who just called me?" There was no answer, only the faint whistling of the wind outside. I slowly opened the security office door, shining the flashlight into the dark hallway. No one was there, but the feeling that someone was lurking somewhere was still very strong. "Mister, help me." The whispered call came again, this time clearer, as if it was right beside me. I spun around, shining the flashlight all over the security office. Still no one, but I clearly felt the presence of a child's spirit here, trying to contact me. An overwhelming fear enveloped me. I didn't know what to do, just stood silently in the darkness, listening to the faint whispered call coming from the void. That night, after the terrifying whispered calls, I couldn't continue my shift. I called the manager and asked for a leave of absence. I needed some time to calm down and think about what I had experienced. However, the strange occurrences didn't leave me alone. Even at home, I still frequently heard small noises, felt watched, and had dreams about the dark hallways of Northwood High. One night, I decided to go back to the school during the day. I wanted to learn more about the fire years ago, about the children who had died here. I went to the school's old record storage room and found documents related to the 1958 fire. Many children had perished, and the cause of the fire was never clearly determined. Among those records, I found a list of the victims' names. One of them was a little girl named Emily Carter, only 7 years old. As I was looking at the list, I suddenly remembered the loud slam in the women's restroom that night. That sound was very similar to the sound of a small door being blown shut by the wind. The door of a children's toilet stall. A terrifying thought flashed through my mind. Could it be? The spirit of Emily Carter was still in the school, forever trapped in the women's restroom, where perhaps she had tried to escape the fire years ago. A few days later, I decided to work the night shift again. I brought some small toys and an old doll, placing them inside the women's restroom. I sat outside, waiting. That night, I heard the sound again. This time it wasn't the slamming of a door, but the soft giggling of children. Then a faint whisper. "Thank you, mister." The next morning, when I checked the women's restroom, the slightly ajar door of a children's toilet stall was now wide open. The toys and the doll were no longer in their original place, but scattered on the floor. I don't know if Emily Carter has found peace yet, but that night, I no longer heard the terrifying noises. Instead, there was an unusual silence, like a weight had been lifted. However, every time night falls and I'm alone in Northwood High School, I still always feel like there are children's eyes watching me from the darkness. And I know that the tormented souls of the children from years ago will forever be a part of this place. Story 6. The Gaze in the Locked Classroom. I'm Arthur Peterson, 45 years old, a history teacher at Blackwood High School in the dreary town of Blackwood, West Virginia. This school year has been quite stressful, with dwindling student numbers. And there are rumors that the school might be closed down. I'm a rather introverted person, and the recent work pressures often leave me feeling tired and anxious. I've been divorced for a few years and live alone in a small apartment near the school. Blackwood High is an old school, built in the early 20th century. With characteristic Gothic architecture and long, dark hallways. I've worked here for over 15 years now, and have never encountered anything unusual. However, in the past few weeks, I've begun to sense a strange difference in the school, especially after everyone has left. Perhaps it's just because I'm too sensitive, but sometimes I feel like I'm not alone in this school at night. At the end of the day, after all the students and colleagues have gone home, Blackwood High becomes eerily silent. Only the sound of my footsteps echoes in the hallways as I check the classrooms and lock up. I'm usually one of the last to leave the school. I have a habit of checking everything again to ensure safety. The cold, white fluorescent lights shine down on the old wooden floors, creating long streaks of light and deep pools of shadow. The smell of dust and old paper always lingers in the air. In the first few nights after I started feeling that something was different, I often heard small noises when I was alone in the school. A slight creaking somewhere in the distance, like a door being moved by the wind, even though all the windows were closed, or a small thud as if something had fallen on the floor upstairs. I usually tried to explain these noises logically. Perhaps it was due to temperature changes causing materials to expand, or perhaps it was small animals that had wandered into the school. However, sometimes I would hear sounds that were harder to explain. A very faint sigh, as if someone was standing right behind me. Or a vague whisper, the words indistinct. I began to have the feeling of being watched. When I walked down the deserted hallways, I often felt an invisible gaze following me. Every time I turned my head, I only saw darkness and an eerie silence. Strange dreams also began to appear in my sleep. I often dreamt of getting lost in the dark hallways of the school, and seeing classroom doors automatically opening and closing mysteriously. The initial signs became increasingly clear and difficult to explain. I began to notice small details that I usually overlooked before. I noticed that there was a classroom at the end of the second-floor hallway, room 207. That always seemed to have a faint yellow light emanating from it in the evening, even when I was sure I had turned off all the lights before leaving. I thought to myself that someone must have forgotten to turn off the light, but the next day when I checked, the light in the room was off. And this kept happening. One evening, as I was working late in my office, I felt the temperature in the room suddenly drop very low, even though the heating system was still working normally. I shivered, even though the air outside wasn't cold. That cold feeling only lasted a few minutes and then disappeared, but it left me with an indescribable unease. I also began to hear strange sounds closer. A very faint whistle, as if someone was standing right outside my office door. Or the sound of soft footsteps walking down the hallway, then stopping right outside the door. Every time I opened the door to check, no one was there. In the mirror in the teacher's restroom, I sometimes briefly saw a dark shadow flitting past behind me, even though I was sure there was no one else in the room. I began to feel that I wasn't alone in this school in the evening. There was some unseen presence here, and it seemed to be trying to get my attention. One Thursday evening, I had to stay at school late to prepare materials for the next day's class. When I finished my work, around 7 p.m., I went to check the classrooms on the second floor again before leaving. As I passed room 207, I saw that the door was closed. I clearly remembered locking this room after the last class. I was a little surprised, but thought to myself that perhaps I had misremembered. I intended to open the door to check if the light was off, but when I touched the doorknob, I felt it was ice cold, a strange coldness unlike the normal temperature. I paused for a moment, feeling that something was wrong. Through the small glass window on the door, I looked inside the room. A faint light emanated from a small desk lamp placed on the teacher's desk. And then, I saw it. At one of the student desks at the back of the room, a student was sitting. It was a boy, around 12 to 13 years old, wearing the school's old uniform. The boy sat upright, his hands placed on the desk, and he was looking directly at the door. I was surprised and a little annoyed. Why would a student still be at school at this hour? And why was the door locked while the light was on? I knocked on the door. "Hey, the school is closed. What are you still doing in there?" There was no answer. The boy remained sitting still, just staring at me. His eyes were dark, with no sign of fear or surprise at seeing me. I knocked on the door harder. "Can you hear me? Come out here now." Still no response. The boy just curled his lips into a faint, cold smile. That smile made me feel an odd discomfort and chill. I decided to open the door with the spare key. When I inserted the key into the lock and turned it gently, the door clicked open. But when I stepped into the room, the classroom was empty. The desk lamp was still on, but there was no one there. The student desk where the boy had just been sitting was still cold. I stood there stunned, looking around the room, trying to understand what had just happened. How had that boy disappeared from a locked room? After the strange incident in room 207, I couldn't get it out of my head. I knew I had seen a student, but that boy had disappeared inexplicably. I began to research the history of Blackwood High School. I searched the school library for old newspapers and yearbooks from past years. I wanted to see if any students had ever met with misfortune at this school. Finally, I found an old newspaper article from the 1960s, reporting on a tragic accident that had occurred at the school. A student named Timothy Brooks, 13 years old, had been involved in an accident during recess and died on the school grounds. Timothy was a quiet boy, who often sat alone reading in class or in secluded places around the school. In the comments section of the article, there was a detail that caught my attention. People said that Timothy often stayed at school late after hours, and had a habit of sitting alone in the classroom at the end of the second-floor hallway, room 207, to read books. A terrifying coincidence. The boy I had seen the night before was also in room 207, and looked very similar to what was described about Timothy Brooks in the article. I found more information about Timothy. In the yearbook from that year, there was a photo of Timothy. He was a boy with a slightly sad face, deep eyes, and dark hair. He was wearing the school's old uniform. I shivered. There was no doubt in my mind. The boy I had seen in the locked classroom was Timothy Brooks. But why was his spirit still in this school? After learning about Timothy Brooks, I began to feel his presence more clearly in the school. The small noises, the feeling of being watched, and the strange light in room 207 all seemed to be connected to Timothy's spirit. Sometimes, when I was alone in my office late, I heard a very faint whisper calling my name. "Mr. Peterson," a weak, sad child's voice. When I passed room 207, I often felt an unusual gust of cold air coming from inside, even when the door was locked. One evening, as I was checking the second-floor hallway, I briefly saw a dark shadow flit past at the end of the hallway, then disappear behind the door of room 207. I began to feel truly scared. Timothy's spirit seemed to be trying to communicate with me, but I didn't know what he wanted. One night, I decided to stay at school later than usual. I went to room 207, stood in front of the door, and whispered, "Timothy, are you there? I know you're here. What do you want to tell me?" There was no answer. Only silence filled the dark hallway. I sighed, about to turn and leave. But just then, I felt a cold hand gently touch my shoulder. I startled and whirled around, but no one was there. However, as soon as I turned back to look at the door of room 207, I briefly saw Timothy's figure standing inside, looking at me through the glass window. His face was still sad, his deep eyes looking at me as if pleading for something. I stammered, "Timothy, what do you want?" Timothy's face didn't change, but his gaze seemed to be directed towards a corner of the room. Following Timothy's gaze, I looked inside room 207. The faint light from outside wasn't enough for me to see everything clearly. The next day, I borrowed the key to room 207 and went inside. The room was nothing special. Just old student desks and a blackboard with faded writing. But when I approached the student desk at the back of the room, where Timothy used to sit, I noticed a small crack in the wooden floor right under the desk. Curious, I knelt down to examine it more closely. I gently pried at the crack with my fingers, and a small piece of the floorboard came loose. Underneath, I saw a small, old wooden box. My heart beat faster. I opened the box. Inside, I found a few yellowed letters and a broken scout badge. The letters were written in a child's handwriting, full of sad confessions about being bullied at school and feelings of loneliness. I read those letters, and I understood. Timothy Brooks had suffered a lot of pain when he was alive. Perhaps, his death wasn't just a simple accident. I brought these letters to the principal. After reading them, he was very moved and decided to open an investigation into what had happened to Timothy Brooks years ago. In the end, the truth was revealed. Timothy had been the victim of severe bullying at school, and the accident years ago was probably not so simple. After the truth came to light, the strange phenomena at Blackwood High gradually disappeared. I no longer heard strange noises, no longer felt watched, and the light in room 207 no longer turned on by itself. Sometimes, when I pass room 207, I still look inside. I no longer see Timothy's sad figure. Instead, there is a quiet space, as if his spirit has finally found peace. But I know that the story of Timothy Brooks and the sad gaze in the locked classroom will forever be etched in my memory. A reminder of the pain that can lie hidden beneath the quiet facade of a school. If the story of the gaze in the locked classroom sent shivers down your spine, if you believe in true horror and hidden mysteries, please support our channel. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next haunting stories, where we uncover the deepest fears. Thanks for listening.